Hi, everybody, and welcome to Traveller Mayday 2026. I'm your host, Frank Succardi from CyborgPrime Games, and today I'm chatting with my friends Ken Burnside, Matthew Francois, and Mike Llaneza from Ad Astra Games. Welcome, guys.
Okay.
Nice to be
Uh,
here again.
Long time no see. Um, why don't we go around briefly and everybody give a little brief introduction as to who they are and what they do at Astra regarding the ship side of things. So let's start with Ken.
I am the founder, publisher, wearer of many hats at Ad Astra Games, which is a one human supervised by one cat game company. I do the game design. I buy the art. I do the editing. I do a lot of the writing. I do all of the game mechanical stuff. I do horrifying things with spreadsheets that have actually caused computer scientists to look at me and with outright honest to God horror. Um, and I have my line developers here. We talked with Matt before. He's the Attack Vector line developer, and Mike Llaneza is the Traveller line developer.
Hmm. Dialing in from a black hole.
Yes.
Hmm. Matthew, how about you? Why don't you give a little background and who you are and how you came to work with that Astra?
Sure. Line developer for Attack Vector Tactical. I discovered it many, many years ago before it was even released, and instantly fell in love with starships that didn't swoop. Um, Attack Vector Tactical is one of the hardest science fiction games you will ever find, playable on the tabletop, combining Newtonian movement and physics with relatively realistic weapon cooling times and assumptions. We try to limit the amount of hand wavium in the setting to a minimum,
Hmm.
giving it a nice hard science feel, and then dropped all of that into a human centric, not quite grim, dark setting of near Earth future where humans continue to make the mistakes that humans make and have to
Hmm.
reap the consequences therein.
Mm. Nice. All right. And Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Ad Astra?
I do the Traveller stuff. That's ship design, scenario design, and fiction for Squadron Strike Traveller products. We've been holding fire on the Second Fleet book for a while, and I see it starting to move up on the schedule, which is good news for people who like to fly spaceships that don't swoop. Ours don't
Hmm.
either, and not so good news for for my free time this year.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. So, Ken, tell us about your STL files that you have on sale.
So it started out with one of my customers just making STL files of the tilt blocks and the stacking tiles that come in the box set.
Oh, right.
In part because they are in Eastern Europe, and shipping things to Eastern Europe is challenging.
Sure.
So they apparently bought somebody's used set in Germany and went all the way back went across the border back into Poland and measured all the things, and they did 3D modeling and set this up and asked if they could hand these out via Cult 3D, and I said sure.
Hmm.
And then one of the things that I periodically sell when I do Kickstarters are what I call box miniature stiffeners. And it turns out that, it took me 2 years to find somebody who actually understood the instructions, but I now have 3D printable box miniature stiffeners that you 3D print. You put the little bits, and you put the lid on the top, and you put a ball bearing inside it, and it's a hollow box that you can wrap the little box miniatures around. And it has little recessed tabs on 3 different sides so that the tabs that are printed in the box miniatures have a place to go. And when you glue your box miniatures to these, you now have nigh indestructible playing pieces, and the ball bearing inside of it rolls down in the tilt blocks to show, to lock things into place for showing your orientation. Beyond that, once those started to sell, I asked our 3D artist if I could get STLs files for all of the 10 world ships for Attack Vector. And he said, "Oh yeah, I've had those because that's what we started him out with for doing the metal miniatures 20 years ago."
Mm-hmm.
And oh, hey, do you want the ones? We also did this with the diaspora miniatures, and so we're selling those too.
Mm.
We are working on a set of articulated flight bases that will allow you to use these 3D printed miniatures and show pitch and roll in 3D with actual painted miniatures. Those are at the 90 to 95% done phase. We're at a point where the user interface on them results in people having to do things that are not intuitive with their fingers. And my experience with going to game conventions with the prototypes are that unless you watch people like hawks, somebody is going to go and take the miniature that you've carefully done in here, rotate it like this without pulling it out first, and then rotating it and sliding it back in. And you're going to get grinding gears done on plastic, which is bad.
Interesting. Tell people what your system of your standoff system is, like so you have these like little plastic like cubes and angles that you can stack up and shows the elevation of your ship above the playing board and also the attitude of the ship. Yep.
So in classic Traveller spaceship combat, your spaceship is a little flat counter. In Squadron Strike Traveller, what we end up doing, and in all of the spaceship games, what we end up doing is we print 6 views of the ship on 6 sides of a rectangular solid, basically. That rectangular solid slides into something that looks like a chair. And if I thought about this, I'd have had one here at my desk. And you can basically put the box miniature in the tilt block to show a pitch going up. You can put 2 of them together and show roll to the side and pitch going up. And then we have color-coded stacking tiles underneath, where white is 1 altitude level, light blue is 4 altitude levels, dark blue is 16, and a black tile on top of the stack is a negative altitude, because in space, there is no cumulogranite layer of the atmosphere to cause your drag coefficient to rise to infinity. Lithobraking is hard. Lithobraking does horrible things to your warranty service.
It's the ship warranty company calling. Do you want to extend your service warranty? So yeah, that sounds cool. And then you also have like an online version of this that's like a computerized interface that does the same thing, but in a computer user interface, browser
in a web
interface.
Browser.
Yeah.
In a web browser interface. And one of the things that we've done with it is we very carefully and deliberately made it something that works with you have to actually know how to play the game rather than the computer automates all the bits for it. Because we found that if we automate all the bits, people come and play it once or twice and, oh, that was neat, and then they move on to other things. If they actually have to invest in knowing the game and knowing the mechanics, they tend to stick around a little bit longer. And it's the primary place where we do our playtesting.
Right. And it's not difficult. It's not a difficult game to learn. It's it might look complicated at first, but you can pick it up pretty fast. I've done the training.
You've done the teaching game for Traveller.
Yeah, I've done the teaching game, and I have a little bit of Starfleet Battles, which experience which helped a lot. But even without that, it was well explained. If you go to their Discord, they have like teaching night, I guess, sometimes. And if you can get in on one of those games, or even just go and observe a game, you can just pick up how to play by observing.
And we've also got a teaching game at Mayday here, so so if you're hearing this interview before the start of the teaching game, come on in. It will be running on CyborgPrime's Discord server, so you don't have to join another Discord server and go, oh God, I'm going to get spammed with a zillion notifications from this.
Right. Just come to my Discord, look in the Mayday channel, and you will see a sub channel for Ad Astra. And that's when we'll have the demos running. Cool. All right, let's talk about your Honorverse minis. So
about 23 years ago, we had 24 years ago, we had the Honor Hunting license, or rather, Ad Astra had the Honor Hunting license. the Honor Harrington license stayed with my former business partners when we separated the companies in 2014. They ran into some medical issues and were about to basically take it out of print. And I said, I have all the files. I can keep this going. I can just pay you your royalties, and you can pay David his royalties. And it took a little bit of ramp up time. We had a whole bunch of miniature molds made for these things. And due to their medical issues and a couple of other things behind the scenes, the miniatures got very hard to find. I kept track of where the molds were and have restocked them and have them in my bins for parting out, and they're now back up on the website for people who have been wanting to buy those miniatures for, oh, good Lord, close to 15 years, at least 10 years now, and possibly closer to 15, where they've been hard to find and all of that.
Are those miniatures pewter or are those plastic?
Those miniatures are all pewter. They are 1/12,000th scale because Honorverse believes in big, gigantic spaceships even more so than Traveller does.
Who designed the Honorverse ships? I noticed there are these weird cylindrical.
Those all came from David Weber's fertile imagination. The thing that happened with them is that he gave some art direction back in the 1990s, and Vane Books cover artists, including Dave Mattingly, who also did some Traveller work, took it to the fore, and that was what we had to make the ships look like, to make it look like the covers on the license.
Cool.
But yes, they. If you look at them, you'll notice that there's these little rings of bumps just behind the hammerheads on the warships. Those are the Warshawski sails. And Honorverse space combat works differently in hyperspace than it does in Newtonian space. There are hyperspace bands, and there is a no-jump zone that is similar to the Traveller no-jump zone, except that it's based on the star you're in, rather than the mass or diameter of the planet. But everything moves by vector movement in Sakanami Island Tactical Simulator, and the hex scale is enormous. It is literally 0.8 light seconds per hex.
Wow. Crazy.
And yeah, the really fun thing is that in the by about the second quarter of the Honorverse series, they start throwing multi-drive missiles that go out 284 hexes.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty far.
Yes.
Especially with that scale.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So tell us about Attack Vector Tactical 3rd edition.
This is something that we announced in 2024. It has finally been dragged over the line for getting it ready to ship. We sell upgrade kits for people who had prior editions, which just sell you the things that changed. And Matt Francois did a lot of the dragging to get it over the line, including revamping how we design ships and digital archaeology to get us out of the hell that is, oh, look, most of our important documents are mailing lists and Excel 2003 files with Visual Basic for Applications macros.
Yikes.
I'll let Matt tell those stories because he seems to enjoy staring at the camera with his eyes very, very wide, convincing you that he has seen things man was not meant to know.
I was just say he stared into the mouth of madness that is your spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet stared back.
I don't know who created the spreadsheet initially, but it was quite a monster. But one of the problems it suffered from was the fact that, it was developed in, I think, Excel 97 was the native file format, with a ton of VBA macros, caused all sorts of problems. And not to point any fingers, but there were also, as you looked at things, a couple errors. And the problem with that is fixing the errors was an impossible task. So one of the first things we did for ships was go through the system and understand it, how things get put together, find those things, and then changed it, because that gave us a solid foundation to make the actual gameplay and setting changes that we wanted to make for 3rd edition. those.
So did you have to go like cell by cell for this massive spreadsheet, or did you just start like a fresh one?
No, I went cell by cell, starting out essentially with the physics of pivots. Attack vector tactical ships consists of two main distinct parts: the hull, which is either a sphere or a cylinder or somewhere in between, and a giant mast to keep the lethal neutron radiation from the fusion drive as far away from that hull as reasonable. This then plays into how fast that ship can point its nose at something else. So starting from there, just unraveling formula after formula to determine, how is the size calculated? How is the radiation calculated? And one of the fun parts about it, one of the reasons that I enjoy doing this from a certain definition of enjoy, was the fact that with our calculations, for example, the mast length is directly related to what we set as a reasonable amount of neutron radiation that a crew could accumulate over a typical cruise. And that number plays into the mast length that the militaries set for their ships, which then plays into the effectiveness of their ships, which is honestly something a real world military would do, is that they would balance out effectiveness with the well-being of their crews, because it is two different lines and you try to pick where you want them to intersect. But yeah, reverse engineering the ship design process was the first step on the road for 3.0, because as a space combat game, we can have all the pretty setting and lore that we can create, but if you don't have a good war game to wrap it around, your audience is going to be pretty small. Not zero, but pretty small.
One of the ways I described the old attack vector ship design spreadsheet was that it was Visual Basic application gnawing its way out of the carcass of a spreadsheet.
That's a reasonable estimation. I also then put my programming use to knowledge, and instead of creating another spreadsheet that would become a monstrosity, I actually put it in a well-established, mature programming language that we all love in Java, so that anyone with some decent programming knowledge can take this over from me when it's time to pass it off. It's one of my post-Shipbook 2 projects is to take a few weeks or a month and wrap up a whole bunch of little projects that I have prevented myself from working on, and finalizing, the API for ship generation and all of those elements is on that list. What I have now is basically a web API that you can throw numbers at, and it will in real time create a ship system display, an SSD, the sheet you print out and have on your tabletop, in real time. So as you add weapons and the ship gets bigger, you'll see that SSD, the weapon will appear, ship will get bigger, it'll pivot a little less worse. You change out the generation of the fusion drive, which adds weight but increases thrust. It'll change live.
Cool.
Not to toot my own horn too much, but it's really one of those things that I was like, can I do this? And then the first time I saw it working, I was blown away by what I had created, because
cool.
it's really quite amazing to be able to just, in the interface, okay, I want four crew boxes, and boom, it updates with all the knock-on effects in live time, because it can run being, a quote-unquote modern back end, it can run those calculations fast enough that you don't notice, which is exciting considering the spreadsheet I started with could not do that. You had to click a button in the spreadsheet, and then you'd had plenty of time to go get a drink of soda or something until it kicked out the results.
Because it used a plugin an Excel plugin called Solver, which is now actually built in basic into Excel. One of the other things is that is that in addition to the software that Matt has created, we also have a process for making ships. And this is a process that is going to make Matt, when Matt starts grinning and starts laughing and leaning back and laughing like this is because he knows the process. So one of the problems with Attack Vector as a game design engine is that it is constrained by physics, which means that it is possible, if you know what all of the available tools are like, to relentlessly solve for the best possible spaceship for a given mission type in Attack Vector. And there are really only like 2 or 3 mission types. That results in a very narrow range of playable ships that are not always fun to fly against each other. So we have a setting that constrains this. One of the things that we do is it's a little bit like almost an RPG of bureaucracy. We ask the person who wants to design a ship to take on the role of being a minister of parliament or a member of a congressional committee who is writing up a simple enough that other politicians will understand it spec sheet for a ship. If you use any game mechanical terms, like the game mechanical name for a weapon, nope, we're changing it. If you use any kind of tactical discussion about how it's supposed to fight, nope, we're changing it. They write up the spec sheet, including the laundry list of what weapons they want to put on it. We then go and take that spec sheet, and one of our archival nerds goes through and looks at all of the mailing list data about what nations can make which weapons and which weapons match to which map to which manufacturers, and which manufacturers are, how should we say this, creative in their accounting. And then this gets handed off to Matt, who then goes through and uses the software he develops and makes a first draft of an SSD. We then hand it back to the person who wrote the spec, and the person who wrote the spec, you can see Matt rubbing his face. The person who wrote the spec looks at this and goes, "No!"
No, I'm going to interject here because you missed a step. I did not hand the spreadsheet to our woeful counselor. I hand it to our horseman of bureaucracy, who then makes changes based on potential parts availability or potential manufacturing deals they would like to see made. Then it goes back to our erstwhile counselor, who looks at how their brilliant vision for a ship has not quite made it through the process exactly as they wanted it.
Mm-hmm. Well, usually we show them the SSD first, and then we hand it off to Ethan, so that Ethan has some guidance on where to go and put little quirky things in it. For example, Xingcheng. This is one of my favorite examples in Attack Vector. Xingcheng is Star China. It is the majority Chinese planet in the 10-world setting. And when we had more people involved in the process, and a lot of them didn't actually play Attack Vector, one of the people who was the advocate for Xingcheng said, "I want a better reactor." And we asked, "How much do you want a better reactor?" And he slid these sliders all the way on up to like 8 or 9. And I said, "That's going to have some bad die rolls for you. Are you sure you want to do this?" And he said, "Sure." And he made the really difficult die rolls. And now but not all of them. And now Xingcheng has an amazing reactor that generates 4 times as much power as the nominal standard reactor in Attack Vector, and shows up. Matt, you'd have to back check me on this, but it's less than 3 times the mass for 4 times the power, and it is. And you got the sliders that says we can mass produce this. They can't make a smaller reactor than this with this tech base. And it is a very good reactor. And the manufacturer who makes this reactor is on very good terms with the government. So they will keep this contract until hell freezes over, or the giant Caterpillar locomotives, get a majority in Parliament. And the end result of this is that Xingcheng has this gigantic reactor that is more power than they need for their frigate, and 2 of them isn't quite enough power for their light cruiser.
So this is how you generate like the lore for all of the different why a ship is the way it is.
Yep.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the other thing to remember is that the industrial base of our colonies, with Earth being lost, is extremely tiny. The old joke is that a college electronics lab can outproduce roughly 9 out of the 10 planets if they wanted to create microprocessors or processor fabs. We did that on purpose. It is very much a resource limited at this point setting. This also means that you have some very difficult choices when it comes to ships. In fact, jumping ahead, we also have Shipbook 2 coming out soon. One of the ships featured there is truly a Franken ship, in that one of the navies decided that a corvette now was worth a frigate in several years, because they had the opportunity to recover a drive from a destroyed enemy ship. And fusion drives are expensive and take time to build. So they essentially recovered this drive, went to their shipyard where they were building the hull for their next frigate, sawed it in half, and glued and welded it to the drive they recovered, because we need this ship now. It's more important to us now than in a year. It is not a ship that anyone who had access, and that's one of the questions we get, can we get an AVT ship design system? And the answer is no, because we want ships like this that no one in their right mind would ever create. But when you go through the genesis of the ship in the setting, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
When your space fleet consists of
3 frigates.
Well, 3 frigates, but all 3 are being used in service for a foreign power that just left your home system on not great terms, and your opponent's fleet just went from 1 to 0. You want to get that 1 back before they get their 1 back. And that's why, in setting, it makes perfect sense why they would make this decision. But any player-driven design system would never be able to accommodate this level of insanity, which is what I like.
Nice.
And then there's the Independencia for the Altiplanians, which is a command platform that is very, very small, but it's essential, because what it has is on its flag bridge is it has all of the legacy hardware needed to communicate with all of the ships that they've inherited with the loss of Earth, which came from different countries, different nations, built by different manufacturers, with their documentation in different languages. Are you understanding the problem now?
Yes, I see.
Yes.
So yeah, that sounds awesome. Yeah, and I like the way you've built lore around your ships, and kind of getting back to my experience with some Starfleet battle stuff is I always wondered, like, who came up with the firing arcs for these weapons, and why are they like this? And they don't seem to be like good, and this might be a way of explaining that reason.
Honestly,
Or
when I made these,
this ship doesn't have enough energy to power all systems, or what's up with that, or barely only has enough energy to power all systems and no more. Why did they do that? And I like this kind of gives you a reason why it kind of built in.
I mean, in the Attack Vector First Edition version of the Wasp, which is one of the iconic ships of the setting, if you fire all 4 of the size 4 medium short range laser systems, you spent 24 power. The maximum capacity in your batteries was 24 power. So we made a joke that if you hit the big red button that says "Don't," you had about 16 seconds while you were hoping to hear the air circulator fans turn back on.
So, what's the difference between attack vector and squadron strike?
So I'll let Matt describe attack vector, and then I'll describe squadron strike, and let Mike jump in on that as well, since we're not picking on him nearly enough.
Attack vector is essentially at its core a small engagement game. Very, very hard sci-fi, including maneuver, fully Newtonian with no other options. This is me giving the Squadron Strike guys hooks to jump on. You fly Newtonian, and it applies to everything. Your missiles can't swoop. You know, your lasers can't change their focus, and your ship is going in one direction until you make it go another direction, including slowing down. Where attack vector gets very difficult, and you need lots of players, is that the ships are also very complex elements.
They're very detailed.
Very detailed. An experienced player can be expected to fly maybe 2 ships at once, or a tender and 2 to 4 gunboats. A new player, 1 at most. And it's going to play also at a slower pace. A typical turn of attack vector tactical with experienced players, when there's action happening, is probably on the order of 20 to 30 minutes.
But that is 8 segments per turn.
That is, yes, that's the last thing I was going to get to. We also use segmented movement over a turn, where each segment is 16 seconds of simulation. And then there are elements of the game that are timed in turns, and elements that are timed in segments, which you get 8 per turn. So that you can get a very piecewise progression, similar to a Starfleet battles, where you are waiting for the exact or very close to exact, hex range to come up so that you can shoot, and then make your
Veer
escape
off or whatever, right? Yeah.
What do you mean veer off? This is vector
Yes, I was going to say no veering.
Okay, so Mike, tell us how that compares to Squadron Strike. You're unmuted, but for some reason we still can't hear you.
You headed for the hills.
Squadron testing.
There we go.
Yep. Now we can hear you.
I'm not a kitty, Your Honor.
Meow. Okay, yeah, Squadron Strike runs a lower complexity level than Attack Vector, which will let you put there are a few more ships on the table per player, get through turns faster, basically iterate through your decisions. The shorter turns make up for the lack of segmented movement. There is, unless somebody has built up a serious vector away from the action, you probably don't need to look for that exact firing range. The trick is that you do have some very interesting breakpoints in weapon power, and we use plotted movement. So you're playing chess, or at least checkers in your first games, trying to end up with the shot you want. Look, much less reactive segment to segment or impulse to impulse than, say, Starfleet battles. But the trade-off works up.
Yeah, a little less resource management, Stuart. I have seen convention games where people have basically turned Starfleet battles into something like Federation Commander, and you pre-plot for 4 impulses of movement or 8 impulses of movement, and so on and so forth.
I had the pleasure of having Vincent Bardia in my local SFB group in high school, and he's the guy who broke SFB's 32 impulses up into 8 mega impulses. Your 4 impulses at a time. When you're definitely not going to hit that optimal firing range in the next 6 or 8 segments or 6 or 8 impulses. All right, move. Take them 4 at a time until you start getting interesting. and then it breaks down. They can break it down into single impulses and then back up.
And if go ahead, Mike.
Yep, Squadron Strike doesn't really need that kind of simplification because it doesn't have that kind of obsessive granularity.
Yeah, Squadron Strike is what I like to call whole turn movement. You plot out your whole turn's movement. Everybody moves at the same time. You plot out all of your fire together. Then fires off simultaneously. What this means is that the game plays faster overall, especially with multiple players, because there's no I go, you go, I make decisions based on what you've just revealed, et cetera, and so on. But it does mean that it's a little less interesting to watch online because everybody's plotting movement. Okay, everybody's being quiet. You put a time
limit, like 2 minutes to plot your movement, 2 minutes to plot your fire, or do you just leave it open to like however long it takes the slowest person?
Matt is about to jump in, so Matt, jump in.
I'll let you continue on Squadron Strike in a moment, but a group of insane people have considered the possibility of playing real-time attack vector tactical because for 90% of the game, 16 seconds is enough to do your order writing and then move the bits and bobs. It gets real hairy, though, when you start throwing in kinetics, and that's where the idea breaks down.
The person who coded the code base that we play online with has done polls a number of times saying, can we put in a toggle that will put a 5-minute timer on certain phases? And the inevitable response is overwhelmingly negative on this because people are going, oh God, I'll be playing against Ken. Ken can do his turns in 30 seconds while flying twice as many ships. This would be horrible. Ken already beats me all over the place like a redheaded stepchild. Time limits, no, it would just add to my stress. Mike and I are still really tempted to go and put that feature in at times.
Yeah, that's something I've seen in a lot of other turn-based games where you have to wait on the other players, and sometimes it's like intolerable, like amounts of time. Have you ever played Robo Rally, the board game?
Oh, many times.
Right, so I guess the new edition includes an egg timer, so that everybody has to play their cards in a certain amount of time.
One of my
not an egg timer, an hourglass. Sorry.
Yeah. One of my favorite ways of playing Robo Rally was when the Clicky BattleTech game was out, and it turned out that the Clicky BattleTech game has movements that are comparable to the movement speeds of the robots in Robo Rally.
Oh,
and
cool.
so we put Clicky Tech Battle Mechs in there and had a battle mech fight where your movement plotting was the Robo Rally cards, and the hazards were in there as well. And it's like, what if Solaris 7, but even crazier?
Yeah, cool. That sounds fun. I've got so much playtime out of that. Unbelievable amounts of playtime, and with family and friends, and always like play to the max amount of players and stuff. It's what a replayable game that is.
So what I was getting to about Starfleet battles, and you can compress the segments as you need to, is if you try doing that in attack vector, it is like ripping the spine out of the game, and the rest of it just kind of collapses into a puddle. You really can't remove the segment timekeeping out of it because it regulates how quickly your ship can turn. For example, in attack vector, when you plot a pivot, let's say I'm doing a 90-degree pivot, all of that math that Matt talked about on designing ships with the length and mass of the hull and the length and mass of the mast and how heavy the engine is tells you how many segments it takes to complete a 90-degree pivot. And that varies based on all the factors he discussed. So for some ships, a 90-degree pivot can be done in like 1 or 2 segments. For some ships, a 90-degree pivot takes 5 segments, which is more than half of a turn. And the chart that we put on these SSDs gives you a how far will you go on each of the segments of the pivot from +0 all the way to the time when it's completed, and it will give you the total amount of time it takes. And when you plot your pivot, you literally draw on the avid with a grease pencil, and it will tell you and write down your time hacks for how long this pivot will take you. If you get rid of the segments in attack vector, you can't turn your ship effectively. All of the maneuverability differences just collapse.
Mm.
And we also use that segment for tracking how dangerous are these kinetic weapons that are coming at me? When will they hit me? How long will it take me to pivot to get the guns I want to shoot at them? How long will it take me to apply how much thrust can I accumulate in this? And it's an awful lot of fun, but it's a bit of a brain burning kind of fun.
Mm. Yeah, sounds interesting. So tell me about what your new Squadron Strike products are that are coming out.
First of all, before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about Attack Vector Shipbook 2, which
Okay.
Matt, how many ships are in Attack Vector Shipbook 2?
I think I'd have this off the top of my head, but I should give me a second here that you could cut out in editing, and I'll bring it up and let you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll even be quiet, so it's an easy cut.
Hey, don't make extra work for me.
The core product for Attack Vector has 15 ships in it, plus 2 more that are downloadable content. And Matt has been putting together the SSD book for Shipbook 2 for a while. And I think it's like 21 ships in that product, or 23?
Right. 3, 2, 1. Attack Vector Tactical has Shipbook 2, which contains 32. Cut that out too. 23 new ships for Attack Vector. The majority of them focus on a newly introduced faction. They're not a secret faction. They were mentioned in the core rule set, but didn't have any ships in their navy. Shipbook 2 kind of tells their story through the first half of our first major interplanetary war of the setting, in which, again, in the lore of the setting, they choose to not ally themselves with either of the two warring sides, opting instead for armed neutrality. Their ships, as mentioned before in passing, are somewhat of a hodgepodge. Starfleet Battles veterans will recognize some parallels here with the Romulan fleet, in that the Republic Federale de Altiplano has initially some ships they bought basically as samples from other fleets when they realized that the worlds were getting a little bit more dangerous and they needed a fleet. So they bought a couple of samples from various fleets. Yes, one of which came from Mexico, and that one is actually featured in the shipbook. After that, after the loss of Earth, Altiplano went around and rescued a whole bunch of orphan ships. These are ships that were in service to, for example, Kenya, that was trying to found a colony on one of the habitable worlds. And then with Earth gone, there's only 2 options: abandon your ship or become a pirate until you either get blown up or are forced to abandon your ship. So there's some what they referred to as the mothball fleet, where Altiplano took them out of mothballs and put them to work. The 3rd generation, we finally start to see some homegrown Altiplanine ships. They settled on a gunboat tender design where you have a frigate that is somewhat undergunned, usually with underthrust, but has docking ports. And the Altiplanines developed heavy gunboats to attach to those. So that adds a unique dynamic to the combat in that you're facing essentially 3 small ships, or one ship that's undergunned and 2 small ships that roughly work out to be a pretty powerful frigate if they were one ship and are flown well. If they're not flown well, good luck. Mm-hmm. This was exciting because, unlike 3rd edition of Attack Vector, we didn't have a finish line to look at. We had 20 plus years of notes from our planetary advocates, from message board posts and emails and little lore ideas, and taking those, making sure they worked, and handing them to our playtest group to make sure that they were fun to play was a difficult but exciting process. And I'm really excited to get these ships into the hands of players because they vastly expand the range of things you have. Not to shortchange the non-Altiplanine ships, we've got a couple of Nations Federée ships, which was essentially a UN successor. They tried to be the guardians of justice and then ran out of money. We've got the Olympian heavy cruiser that predates the modern one you saw in the core rulebook, and is a completely different paradigm. It definitely represents a different mindset of the Olympian fleet, as well as some ships that belong in a museum. Mansour was previously featured in Nexus Journal 1, and it makes its return here in Shipbook 2. It's one of our ships from a bygone age, built on Earth to the Caliphate, and has a whole bunch of technology that you can neither repair nor replace, because we just don't have the manufacturing capabilities anymore.
One of the things that we do with the 10 world setting is that, sort of like Battletech, it's a little bit of a lost tech setting. Actually, more than a little bit of a lost tech setting. But unlike Battletech, so Battletech eventually did the Helm Core, and then did the Clan Invasion, which was a total reboot of the setting and the total reboot of the game mechanics, because they'd come to the conclusion that with the 3025 tech base with Battletech, the games took too long because the balance between offense and defense was too low. You didn't have enough gunpowder. You didn't have enough firepower to actually finish the fights in a reasonable number of turns. So one of the things that they did with the clan tech was introduce mechs with higher firepower, and bigger, better, badder guns. And yes, the armor got a little bit better and a little bit lighter, but now we introduced XL engines, and suddenly you have a lot of armor. And once that armor gets punched through, oh dear Lord, do you have problems? Because now your engine is taking up 9 critical slots instead of 3. And they have since gone down that rabbit hole even further in the new Ilklon, test era. And they've basically moved the timeline up to 31 to 60 something. With BattleTech, which is almost a century and a half after where I first started playing it, and due to various things, I kind of faded out right about the time the Federation, the FedCom Civil War happened in the BattleTech timeline. So there's like a century of BattleTech history that I know nothing about.
I used to love BattleTech and MechWarrior, and once MechWarrior Online came out, I stopped playing all the other variations, and that's my most played video game by far.
But BattleTech basically had to advance the tech base to revamp the game. And we're kind of going in the opposite direction. There are definite limits that Matt and I know that the people who are designing ships don't know about, that are going to be unpleasant surprises to them when they bump into them. And we have plans for what's going to come down in the future. That should be fun. Cool. Squadron. So you asked about Squadron Strike products. I have Squadron Strike 3rd Edition. Literally, I just finished the last edits on the tutorial book before we start, about 20 minutes before we started this call. And I have to go parallelize those edits for the tutorial book for the Traveller product line. We are text complete on the Squadron Strike 3rd Edition rulebook. The 3rd Edition rulebook makes a number of changes. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I'm expecting Squadron Strike 3rd Edition to be coming out in May. With any luck, it'll be coming out in early May, but I'm just going to say May. And
when are we going to see Traveller content?
Right now, we have a set of ships for Squadron Strike Traveller that Michael has designed that I need to migrate up to the latest version of the ship design spreadsheet. And I'm waiting for the software that turns the ship design spreadsheet's XML output into SSDs to be updated. And when that happens, I'm going to send these. I'm going to make a couple of cleanup things and send them back to Mike to go through and travel and make sure I haven't done horrific harm to what it is that makes Traveller feel like Traveller. And with any luck, we will have Squadron Strike Traveller Shipbook 2, which will be the Solomani Rim War, an entirely different time period from the 1105 stuff that's in the core set sometime later this summer. I'm looking forward to unleashing Charles Oins on making the art for all of those ships. I've also done a little bit of tentative work on trying to make adventurer class ships for Traveller. My original plan for doing the game demo at Mayday was to more or less do the Han Solo and Luke and everybody gets out of Mos Eisley and runs away ahead of the TIE fighters, and the TIE fighters overtake you and you have to shoot them down to be able to get out. And that doesn't actually work with a Type A freighter.
No. But I think if you go to where the Traveller players are, you'll be able to find enough people to come and play test that for you. Do come by my server. I'm sure there will be people who you can who'll be interested in play testing.
Yeah, we did a play test a couple of weeks ago that I thought went really well. Whole game in about 20 minutes.
Oh, nice.
Short, sharp. You got to make a couple decisions. You got to roll some dice. I call that gameplay. And it was with adventure class ships.
Cool. Dice
rolls were very close to giving one-shot kills for both sides. And 20 minutes. Maybe 30 if it's your first game, but that's extremely playable.
Right.
And you can either do a bunch.
Shorter games like that because then if you have time, you can play another one.
Or another one, you can go big.
Or you can drop it in as a chunk of your Traveller playtest of your Traveller game session.
Right. One thing I used to hate about Starfleet battles and also BattleTech was a 6-hour game or a 4-hour game. Is it always took way longer to play. And then when we started playing it online, I was like, wow, we did this game in 15 minutes and there was 24 mechs. Back in the day, we had one mech each and there was 4 of us and we couldn't get done in 4 to 6 hours. It's
Yep.
It's like, wow, that 4 hours represented about 10 minutes of BattleTech time.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go with that. One thing that Ken did a lot of work on, I think in 24, was multi-ship SSDs, which is a great way to get a lot of action going onto the table in a relatively compact space. 3 destroyer scale ships in Squadron Strike Traveller have about as many SSDs on their box, or many boxes on their SSDs as a heavy cruiser or battleship. You get to do a lot of stuff. You can drive yourself crazy by breaking formation and going for a pincher maneuver or whatever you want to call your tactical craziness. But it lets you get more ships on table, bigger action.
Bigger action with smaller ships. If you are looking to go and play a 12 battleship on 12 battleship Squadron Strike Traveller game, one, have friends. No, more friends than that, and make sure that part of your budget is buying enough pizzas.
That's an all-day sucker. But if you're setting one of those up, give me enough notice to get plane tickets.
So, other products that we have in the queue, I have Exile Stars, which is the next thing I'm going to be working on once I have Squadron Strike 3rd Edition done. And the goal with Squadron Strike 3rd Edition is to finish off these tutorial edits this weekend and then hand it on out to a couple of volunteers to basically just do a close read through all the books. Because if they do a close read through all the books, they will find things that I'm no longer seeing because I've been staring at this text for however long it has been. Among the changes that we've done is we have completely revamped how torpedo weapons work in Squadron Strike. Squadron Strike has 3 families of weapons. Beams, I shoot from my ship to your ship. Missiles, I launch from my ship to where your ship is going to be after its movement next turn. Torpedoes, I launch a thing and it goes and it chases you down. We have a type of torpedo that we call the Type S torpedo, which is almost but not quite Starfleet Battle's torpedo movement. Romulan plasma torpedoes chasing a ship down. You move away from it. It has a launch anchor. If you ever get between the launch anchor and the torpedo, regardless of the distance the torpedo has from the launch anchor, the torpedo will impact you and get to make an attack roll. But it very much shapes maneuver much the same way that plasma torpedoes do in Starfleet battles. We had players who were doing the torpedo playtest, playing the SFB conversions that we'd done up at Squadron Strike to test these torpedo rules, who independently, without any input from me, recreated the plasma ballet. That was when I knew I had the torpedoes done right.
Yep, that did it.
The other thing that we ended up doing with this is we made drift mode torpedoes, because Starfleet Battles torpedoes are not in any way, shape, or form physically accurate. Drift mode torpedoes do a weird hybrid of vector movement and what I call mode 1 movement, and get the same results as a vector movement torpedo, without somebody having to do a one-turn pre-plot game and try and figure out where their opponent is going to be in 3 turns, so they can sit there and stare off into space doing vector math until their brains leak out their nose. It allows the torpedo to be flown a little bit reactively, and it allows the player to react to the torpedo as a maneuver, as an attack on their maneuver capabilities. Not their maneuver abilities, but the kind of maneuvers they're playing in the game. Those are the 2 big changes. We've also cleaned up a little bit of the interceptor weapon system from what the last time the rulebook was iterated and updated. We've added a bunch more weapon traits. We've added 2 more first-tier defenses in Squadron Strike. And added more options for ship design, more things you can put into designing ships in Squadron Strike. Because unlike Attack Vector, Squadron Strike is all about letting players design ships. I have a product that is now close to 60,000 words long that hasn't been published yet, that is basically the Squadron Strike setting design manual. Not a ship design manual, a setting design manual. This is almost, but not quite, the 4th volume of the world-building books that we talked about with the interview with John Ziegler and Jess and myself. Because it's not enough to be able to design ships. If you don't have a setting for those ships to exist in, if you don't have a setting that shapes how those ships are designed, even if you don't do quite the degree of sadism that we do in Attack Vector ship design process, then your ships feel very generic. They feel interchangeable.
Right. Yeah, and
they
that extra lore helps feed missions and scenarios.
Exactly.
Yes, in Squadron Strike setting design, the players do the sadism to each other.
Yes. But once we've got that done, the next product in the queue that I'm working on is Exile Stars. And Exile Stars more or less grew out of peak when in 2013, the deal that I was working on to actually do a licensed Starfleet Battles Squadron Strike deal basically fell apart because of Steve Cole being Steve Cole. And I went and said, so what if we make something that is vaguely analogous to Star Trek, but is most definitely not Star Trek? What things can we change to make it uniquely and entirely our own? And so we have the Interstellar League. The Interstellar League has stumbled across the Rulamani banks, because for the Rulamani, an alien species that did favor trading as part of their development cycle, developed banking before they developed agriculture for keeping track of favors and the like. The Interstellar League was in transit and are looking for planets to settle on. And it turns out that the planets that humans like to settle on aren't exactly comfortable for the Rulamani. And the Rulamani had found a whole swath of them of about similar ages and leased them to the Interstellar League in return for buying some technology from the League, and also to set up the Interstellar League as sort of a buffer state between them and the Carthian domains. And the Carthian domains are what happens if Tibetan Buddhism goes horrifyingly wrong? And the only people who get reborn out of the afterlife or the non-existence of death are those with sufficiently aggressive personalities to claw their way back. And thus we have our Klingon analogs, and our Romulan/Ferengi analogs are the Rulamani Banks, and the Interstellar League. The Interstellar League is not actually telling the Rulamani patrons why they're looking for new worlds to colonize and what happens to where they came from. They're not talking about this. So there are some mysteries in the setting, and as people who like Traveller will go, wait, settings with mysteries in them? Sign me up.
Right.
And this was also, at the time that I started this, like I said, Starfleet Battles deal had fallen apart. So I got to go, let's make something Federation-like that isn't exactly the Federation. One of the things that I did is I made sure that the actual people of the Interstellar League are more East Asian are more East Asian and Indian than everybody in the Federation is an American with a token Russian or the token Klingon, or the token woman who is from South Africa. And speaking, I've forgotten the language that Uhura speaks natively, and what her name or the language her name comes from. Zulu, I think. No, Swahili.
Swahili.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. Rather than it's obviously Americans, but with token members of other human societies in there. And there's an awful lot of background detail that is in there. There's also a novel that is shaping up nicely from a friend of mine named Rob Hansen.
I was going to say, who's writing the novel?
Rob Auerbach is the name that he would prefer to be associated with his fiction writing. And I gave Rob a very simple mission. There are certain tropes for writing exploration fiction that date back to the Age of Sail. You have the captain, who is isolated from the rest of the crew. You have the first officer, who is the person who interfaces between the captain and the rest of the crew, and basically is the person who has all the duty assignments and decides if a problem is bad enough that it needs to come to the captain's attention. You usually have a point of view character who is a freshly minted junior officer who is going to make mistakes, but by making mistakes act as the point of view character for the reader to learn about the naval culture and what's going on. You usually have one or two scientist characters who are going to go on away missions, and then you usually have a medical doctor in there who might or might not, if you're going from the Obdura Matarin series, also be your scientist on this. And I gave him these sets of tropes. And he started out by writing a bunch of sections of the novel from the perspective of a supernumerary Marine first lieutenant who is not part of the Marine detachment on this ship. And in fact is kind of resented by the first lieutenant who is the leader of the Marine detachment on this little tiny survey corvette. And their mission is to find out what happens to some survey ships that are long overdue as they are surveying these leased worlds. And by the way, at the time that this takes place, nobody in the League knows about the Carthian domains at all. And so this is a little bit of episodic stuff of not quite Planet of the Week, but the dynamics of these various people who are from different backgrounds shoved onto a military warship with a bunch of civilian scientists who really don't like all of the restrictions put on what they're doing. We have a supernumerary Marine lieutenant who is our primary point of view character who is interfacing with various chunks of the crew. We have our brand new, freshly minted navigation officer, junior navigation officer, who is a mathematical prodigy and is making mistakes and learning about naval culture, but not as what wasn't meant to, what and didn't end up being on this. And Matt is going to laugh a little bit, but that particular character is based off of our chief playtester for Attack Vector.
Funny. Tell us about Ringgate.
So one of the other projects that we have coming up is Ringgate, which grew out of the lessons we learned making Squadron Strike Traveller. Squadron Strike Traveller added a bunch of stuff to Squadron Strike, like burst mode shielding, which we call sandcasters in the Traveller stuff. If you were doing Traveller properly, a sandcaster should be a thing you throw out on the map, and then you shoot bearings through it and get accuracy penalties. And one, it also tends to be something you put up reactively to lasers coming in. And that kind of made my head hurt. So we initially tried doing this as a deployable accuracy penalty generator, and it made everybody's heads hurt. So we turned it into effectively Starfleet battle shielding that uses ammunition. You spend ammunition, a belt of shielding goes up, somebody shoots through that belt of shielding, it partially defends your ship, et cetera, and so on. And you can run out of ammunition, or you can have the ammunition shot off of your ship, and this can be bad. I took that basic dynamic and put it in a different universe where humanity in the early 22nd century has discovered an artifact orbiting Uranus. And when they managed to turn it on, it was an 18.34 meter diameter circle that goes into a different variety of space where the laws of physics are rather different. For example, the constant E shows up in a lot more places in ring space than it does in our universe. And time is compressed in ring space, and distances are compressed in ring space. And the logical implication of that is that if you generate power in our universe, or extract power from our universe, and basically run a jumper cable through that 18.34 meter diameter circle, you get a lot more power in ring space for doing things with. Which led people to wonder, since you can't actually build the ring gates in our universe, or rather, you can't actually punch them into ring space from our universe. You have to assemble them in chunks, take them through that 18.34 meter hole, assemble them, and then apply a large amount of power to punch them into our universe. That perhaps ring space is the original universe, and our universe was just an industrial application to generate power for ring space. And that led to some other implications, like is dark energy, the varying rates of expansion in our universe, triggered by whoever the ring builders were putting more of their mind tailings effectively in our universe. At which point you're getting
interdimensional mind tailings.
Yeah. Well, it's just an expansion of greater amounts of vacuum. So I like to describe it as the two-slit interference pattern between H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur C. Clarke. There are things that are shaping our universe that are not of our universe from H.P. Lovecraft. And they don't care about us at all, other than, why the hell are these rats in the cable runs again? Fumigate!
Tell us about Reprisal of the Hegemon.
So one of the products that I sell right now is Romance of the Seven Realms, which I wrote the first version of, the first edition of, shortly after Fantasy Flight Games announced X-Wing 2.0. Because I saw how they were launching X-Wing 2.0 and realized that they were shooting themselves in the foot, making sure that they got a good hit, reloading the shotgun and shooting again. With how they were doing that launch. They completely alienated all of their casual players with the 2.0 launch. So I decided real quick, let's see if I can lure disgruntled X-Wing players into Squadron Strike by making zippy little space fighters. And it sold out of its first print run. I did a second edition of it in 2025. And that has been selling nicely and well with updated art. And Reprisal of the Hegemon is adding another 13 space fighters to that setting. And it's adding two new factions with their space fighters. We have a mercenary faction, and we have the Reaver faction. And the Reaver faction are totally nuts. The Reaver faction are basically automata, which is what Romance of the Seven Realms calls droids in Star Wars parlance, who think that both the hegemony and the royalists are enslaving their brethren. And, they're kind of like the more ardent versions of the abolitionists in the Civil War. They want to free their comrades from the slavery that the royalists and the hegemony are putting them in. They just might be a little bit enthusiastic about making sure that those meatbag slavers can't actually, can't actually do this again. So having fun with that moral implication there of what if the droids managed to make their own faction, and their faction as setup was and their faction as setup had a moral cause that was as important as ending slavery in America. Mike just said, rewiring John Brown's body. Be right back. And Reprisal of the Hegemon is going to add more to that setting, including expanding the Flight of the Fisher Queen game to adding more locations to it, and having triggers for the Reavers coming on out and doing interesting things, and complicating the life of the Fisher Queen as she tries to unite the Seven Realms into an open rebellion against the N-City hegemony.
Wow. Well, you got a lot of ideas and creative stuff there, and it seems like you really enjoy your lore generation.
I do. The other thing that we're getting into this is we're also have another product coming up called Newton's Cradle, which will be out after Exile Stars and likely before Ringgate and Reprisal of the Hegemon. Newton's Cradle is basically, what if we made a very simple Expanse-inspired space combat setting? And we have a proxy war happening in the Galilean moons of Jupiter. And all the ships are Mode 2, vector movement. All of the ships use fuel. But the only defense that's used in the game is skin armor. I mentioned that Squadron Strike was adding 2 more first-tier defenses, bringing the total up to 7. Those 7 defenses are ECM, deflector shields, ablative shields, screens, filters, which are basically variations of the same kind of defense, skin armor, and component armor. So that's 7 of them. And the feel of a faction that you build in Squadron Strike is, what defenses are you using? What mix of defenses are you using? What movement mode are you using? The 3 movement modes are 0, 1, and 2. They're named after the number of Newton's laws being obeyed. Mode 0 movement is obeying none of Newton's laws. Your ships have a maximum speed, and if you turn off the engines, they skid to a stop. Mode 1 movement is kind of how most spaceship media portrays spaceship movement. Ships move a lot like planes or maybe surface naval ships, and they can accelerate. And when they turn, they bleed speed off the numinous ether of space and slow down, because that's how airplanes slow down. If you've ever seen an X-wing go as it banks through space and slows down, that is Mode 1 movement, as noted by the noted documentarian George Lucas in his documentary The Star Wars.
It was actually historical. It wasn't. It was happened a long time ago.
Yes, in a galaxy far enough away that we can actually see the events in real time if we have big enough telescopes. And Mode 2 is vector movement. And on top of that, you have the ability to slide in whether or not your movement modes use fuel or not. But between movement modes and the kinds of defenses, and 3 weapon families, and over 700 weapon special abilities that are not numerical entries into the weapon tables, the tagline on Squadron Strike is any ship, any universe, fully 3D. And that might actually be underselling it.
Think champions for designing weapons. Whole list of traits you can choose. And combine in interesting ways.
Gets mentioned a lot on Mayday.
There's a lot of gearheads cut their teeth on that back in the day.
Yep. All right, cool. So where can people find your titles and get in touch with you?
Come on to adastragames.com. We have a Discord server. We have a mailing list that you can sign up for product announcements. And I'll be doing not just the teaching game on Mayday in the CyborgPrime Discord server, but I'll be doing 2 seminars in the CyborgPrime Discord server for people to drop in on. And one of them is going to be a show and tell for Squadron Strike, showing an SSD and how you read it and so on and so forth, using the Squadron Strike Traveller ships, just to show you the differences between 3 different 4,000 D-ton destroyers and how they fly differently, without you having to learn all the game, but show and tell on this. That one will be before the teaching game. The one after the teaching game will be why space combat in RPGs is usually disappointing, and a brainstorming session to make it less disappointing. I may or may not be using the phrase, and then we hitch dolphins to the front of your chariot during that stage.
It's your favorite. Your favorite metaphor. All right, cool. All right, guys. Well, looks like we've covered everything we intended to, so we've come to the end of our interview. My guests today have been Ken Burnside, Matthew Francois, and Mike Llaneza from Ad Astra Games. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Super happy to be here. Always enjoy the
And
conversation.
Hope to see you again for next year's Mayday event. And thank you, fellow travelers. Until next time, happy traveling. Want to build better sci-fi worlds? Check out Ad Astra Games. Scan the QR code, use the link on screen, or find it in the description below. If you enjoyed this interview, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss future episodes. Now tell me, would you rather command a squadron or pilot a single ship in full 3D space? Tell me what you'd choose and why in the comments. A quick thank you to my patrons. Your support helps make events like Mayday and interviews like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel and get behind-the-scenes access, early content, and more, you can join us on Patreon. And to everyone already supporting, thank you. I truly appreciate it. Check out one of these videos next, and I'll see you in the combat simulator.